expecting apple pie and horseback riding, you go to see your grandfather in a little suburb. Rather, a metal gate blocks the door along with a no trespassing HOA controlled notice. My name is Reed Boone, and seeing my grandpa Heron squared against Debbie Holbrook, the red-vested HOA queen, makes me nearly choke. Grandpa, though, has transformed that gate into a dollar horror. Comment from where you are observing if you have ever dealt with HOA stupidity. You will laugh till you weep watching this film. Trust me. The events that follow will cause you to doubt what you believed you understood about neighborhood politics and property ownership. Though he had just purchased the property 6 months ago to fulfill his ambition of running horses in retirement, I pulled up to what Grandpa and I referred to as his ranch. With its old barn, horse stables, and spreading oak trees that had been there longer than any of us, the rural property was stunningly different from the cookie-cutter HOA development next door. Still, something felt off. Dead right. Mine's stomach fell where the familiar dirt walk to his front gate used to be. Now a shining metal fence stretched over the entrance replete with a brilliant red sign saying, "No access back down after location." This was not any fence, either. This amounted to a war declaration. A white SUV arrived screaming around the bend, dust flying everywhere before I could even register what I was seeing. Debbie Holbrook left, and let me tell you she exuded business. After too many meetings, red blazer, clipboard, and that look HOA types start to show. With arms folded and eyes fixed on this fence as though it had personally offended his mother, she marched over to Grandpa Harlan standing beside his pickup vehicle. "Mr. Boone," Debbie said, her voice reflecting the tone people adopt when they believe they will be winning an argument. "I'm here to discuss the unauthorized use of community property." She waved a stack of documents that looked legitimate enough to fool most people. But Grandpa's eyes were already doing that thing they did when he was literally and figuratively computing angles. Grandpa's voice sounded cool, yet I could hear the steel underfoot. "Community property." Debbie's smile was the type she never saw. "Ma'am, I've been using this path for 6 months and it runs right through the middle of my land." She pushed the papers toward him like she was delivering a warrant. "Actually, according to these surveys, this path belongs to the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. We need you to sign this agreement transferring usage rights back to the community." I started on my phone recording. Something informed me this would be one to write about. Neighbor April Knox, who I had seen about, halted her morning run to catch the performance, and even from across the street I could see she was equally perplexed about this unexpected fence scenario. Grandpa grabbed the papers, looked at them for about 3 seconds, then returned them. "These aren't worth the paper they're printed on," he said matter of course. "But I value your work." Debbie's face began to turn almost exactly like her blazer, a shade of red. Grandpa's demeanor changed. "Mr. Boone, this ranch of yours is really ruining the vibe of the neighborhood. The horses, the rustic look, it's affecting property values. We're trying to maintain a certain standard here." And I knew we were going to see the man who had spent 40 years working as a mechanical engineer before calling it quit. "Standards," he said softly once again. "Well, Debbie, you haven't met a gate that speaks back if you believe a fence stops me." Then the threat arrived, presented with the kind of bureaucratic menace only HOA leaders can generate. Grandpa simply grinned. "Mr. Boone, if you continue to trespass on HOA property, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action. The community has spoken, and we will not tolerate this disruption to our peaceful neighborhood." Not the kind smile but the one meant to indicate he was already 3 steps ahead of whatever game she believed she was playing. "Ralph," he said to his neighbor Ralph Jenkins working on a classic Mustang in his driveway. Ralph cleaned his hands on a rag and nodded, giving Debbie a look that suggested he'd had run-ins with the HOA queen. "Could you do me a favor and check those property line markers we had surveyed last month?" Grandpa looked to me with that smile I knew from boyhood as Debbie crawled back into her SUV, murmuring something about troublesome neighbors. Usually, the one thought to be about to create something incredible or find the most imaginative solution to a problem. I kept the video running since something told me Grandpa's intended action would be legendary. "Reed, son, I think it's time this gate learned some manners." Long shadows from the afternoon sun were spreading across the fence, and I could almost see the gears whirl in his head. This extended beyond a blocked driveway now. This was about principle, property rights, and the kind of American fortitude that helped to create this nation. April jogged over while Debbie's SUV vanished around the bend. Still panting. What was that all about? She questioned. Grandpa pointed his cap toward her. Reed, I hope you have plenty of storage on that phone of yours because Debbie thinks she can block her gate. She's about to find out what it means when the gate pushes back. He looked back at the fence, then at me. That young lady was the opening move in what I suspect is going to be a very interesting game of chess. The sun was setting, casting orange and pink hues over the sky, and I knew I was about to see something that would make David against Goliath seem like a pleasant neighborhood dispute. 2 days later I drove there to see Grandpa had been really busy. The actual masterwork was the gate itself. Where the fence used to impede his access totally was now a little wooden booth painted in brilliant yellow and blue with a hand-carved sign saying, "Toll booth $5 per pass. Exact change appreciated." Grandpa had constructed a mechanical gate with the kind of snap you would find from an engineer with too much spare time and little tolerance for stupidity. He was seated in the booth sporting a baseball cap and smiling as though he had eliminated world poverty. "Welcome to Boone's Toll Plaza," he said. "Either pay up or stay out." The first test took 1 hour. Debbie's white SUV arrived barreling down the road, presumably expecting to find Grandpa scared, and the fence problem settled in her advantage. Rather, she came upon a toll booth and a very committed 75-year-old man who had obviously spent his retirement arranging for precisely this moment. Before she ever put the car in park, she rolled down her window, pulled up to the gate, and began screaming. "This is HOA property. What is the meaning of this ridiculous carnival attraction?" Leaning out of his booth window, Grandpa looked every inch the professional toll collector would have using his clipboard. The gate mechanism was a thing of beauty. "Ma'am, this here is a private access road and the fee for passage is $5. You can pay cash, but I am afraid I do not yet have a card reader set up." Debbie tried to inch forward without paying, and sensors Grandpa had placed set the gate to close with a pleasing clang resonating across the neighborhood. She attempted backing up and running another run at it, but the gate was far faster than her reflexes and far smarter than her plan. She yelled, blowing her horn like that would have changed the rules of physics or property ownership, calling, "This is extortion." Grandpa gently held the exact property survey sheets Ralph had confirmed up to her window. "Based on the county records, this road runs exactly through the middle of my land. So unless you have $5 or a better survey, I'm afraid you will have to find another road to wherever it is you're going in such a hurry." The local response was instantaneous and split. While some people moaned about having to pay $5 to get along what they would have previously considered a public walkway, others appeared to appreciate seeing Debbie experience her own medication. Grandpa handed him a handwritten receipt saying, "Toll paid. Welcome to freedom," and raised the gate with a theatrical flourish. Ralph drove up in his rebuilt Mustang, placed a $5 on Grandpa's counter and said, "Best $5 I've spent all week. Can I get a receipt?" I couldn't stop filming since the whole thing was so ridiculous yet so precisely rational. This went beyond just financial considerations. This has to do with control. Grandpa was reversing one toll at a time as well. Debbie was not, however, going down without a fight. 2 men in uniforms that seemed official enough to fool most people walked out 2 hours later, when a private security car pulled up. Grandpa should leave right now, they told him, as they were there to guard the location. Dealing with a retired engineer who had spent 40 years reading contracts and rules was not what they anticipated. Grandpa said, "Gentlemen," not moving from his toll booth. When they couldn't show any of those things, he advised they might wish to call their company and get their facts straight before trespassing on his land. "I'm going to need to see some identification, a warrant, and proof that you have any authority whatsoever on private property." Grandpa could be slipped through a rear gate I had seen earlier, a small road that circled the property border and linked to his main driveway, while the security guards were making phone calls and looked ever more uneasy. Though it meant Debbie's roadblock was essentially worthless, it was overgrown and barely large enough for a human. After uploading the footage of the security confrontation that evening, by morning the video had attracted over 10,000 views and hundreds of comments from people relating their own HOA horror tales. The help was just too much. Still, what followed was even better. Grandpa started what he deemed to be the VIP Pass Club. Members paid $50 a month and had unrestricted entrance through the toll gate, a laminated card bearing the Boone Ranch insignia, and what he described as priority parking at local gatherings. The VIP program was brilliant in simplicity. For neighbors weary of coping with Debbie's relentless rules and restrictions, $50 a month seemed like a bargain for the advantage of completely avoiding her authority. Grandpa had 25 VIP members within a week, including April, who informed me she registered especially because she was tired of Debbie's power trips. The non-VIP neighbors, those who were faithful to Debbie's concept of local conformity, started grumbling that the toll system was separating the community and generating an unfair hierarchy. They were right, of course, but they also missed the whole point. Almost right away, the neighborhood's split became apparent. Neighbors drove by waving like Grandpa was royalty. I captured other disputes between neighbors. One particularly noteworthy discussion, in which a woman insisted on knowing why her next-door neighbor received privileged access simply because he paid for a VIP card. Naturally, the response was straightforward. He opted to back the individual opposing HOA overreach instead of the one generating it. That evening April got in touch with me with information that turned things around. She had been researching Debbie's record as HOA president and found some quite unusual variances in the community fees. Debbie apparently had been slowly increasing HOA dues for the past year, citing legal bills and community enhancements. But April looked for no proof of where that money was really going. She wanted to assist reveal whatever was truly going on, since Debbie's aggressive strategies seemed to go beyond only preserving property values. Grandpa's toll booth had done more than just resolve a property conflict, as I observed the neighborhood divide into VIP and non-VIP groups. It had exposed the fault lines already present in this otherwise ideal suburban society. Arriving on a Wednesday morning, the legal threat came from a courier looking as though he would rather be anywhere else. Usually meant to scare, the envelope was thick, official appearing, and marked urgent legal notification in red letters. Grandpa opened it right there at the toll booth with me, photographing the entire process, and what he discovered inside was a masterwork of bureaucratic intimidation. Said to be from Harrison Wheeler and Associates Attorneys at Law, the letter accused Grandpa of illegal extortion, interference with common property, and public nuisance creation. It insisted that he take down the toll booth within 72 hours or risk legal action, with major financial penalties, and maybe criminal accusations. Grandpa once read the letter twice, then glanced up at the camera with the same engineering accuracy I had seen him use to difficult carpenters and faulty lawnmowers. Holding the letter for the camera, he remarked, "Read. This is about as real as Debbie's HOA crown." Then, in what turned out to be one of the most fulfilling events I have ever filmed, he broke the letter into small bits and gently said that the legal language was rife with mistakes any actual attorney would have found. The letterhead was printed on standard computer paper, and the law firm did not exist. Within hours, the video of Grandpa carefully refuting and demolishing the bogus legal threat became viral, and by the end of the day had almost 50,000 views. Debbie still had to finish though. Should she be unable to scare Grandpa with fictitious legal documentation, she would instead turn the neighbors against him by means of a campaign of whispered rumors and selective indignation. One man in a stiff suit clutching what appeared to be HOA minutes walked up to Grandpa and scolded him of creating a dangerous precedent. Grandpa stared at him for a time, then remarked, "The only dangerous thing here is letting cowards write the rules." Most unnaturally, someone had started leaving rubbish close to the ranch gate. Nothing very clear, just enough to imply Grandpa's house was somehow less kept than the others in the neighborhood. One afternoon, Grandpa was standing by the fence, his hand resting on the wooden rail, gazing out at the vacant horse stable he had been intending to fill. He looked worn out for the first time since this whole affair began. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally worn down by the ongoing strife. I started to fear, thinking we were about to lose the battle. "You know, Reed," he continued softly, "there was a time when I thought about just giving in, taking down the toll booth, apologizing to Debbie, maybe even selling the place and finding somewhere quieter." Then he looked to me, though, with that recognizable spark in his eyes. "But then I remembered something my dad Told me when about your age. Son, if you give up every time someone tries to push you around, pretty soon you'll find yourself with nowhere left to stand. Give up? Not to her. Another letter arrived to mark the next escalation. Said to be from the county planning department, this one asserted that the toll booth needed to be taken down right away since it violated local zoning rules. Unlike the bogus legal threat, this one was printed on what appeared to be official stationery and featured reference numbers that would have misled someone lacking knowledge of government documentation verification. Confirmed that no such letter had been delivered, Grandpa spent an hour on the phone with the actual county planning office and found that someone had gone to great effort to create official documentation. The clerk he contacted was so offended by the fabrication, she presented to produce a formal declaration attesting to no zoning infractions. April and I were working on revealing the truth about Debbie's origins, while Grandpa was handling bogus government records. April had contacts at the local newspaper from her freelance journalistic work, and together we had found some fascinating data about Debbie's extreme need to keep control over the HOA. It turns out she had been let go from her old property management company for what her former company gently referred to as accounting errors. Translation: Debbie had been caught stealing money from community maintenance funds, and the property management business had silently let her go instead of deal with the negative press resulting from a criminal investigation. Ralph's participation in our research was equally worthwhile. By use of his surveyor acquaintance and some old county records, he had been able to unequivocally establish that Debbie's fence was not just on Grandpa's land, but also that the HOA had never ever possessed the contested way in first place. The original subdivision plan amply demonstrated the path as a private easement belonging to whoever owned the ranch land. Debbie had been asserting control over property never owned by the HOA, and she had been doing it with enough assurance that most people had just thought she was right. Equipped with evidence of Debbie's false background and documentation proving her fence was unlawful, Grandpa decided it was time to attack. He produced flyers outlining all the facts: Debbie's past employment termination, falsified government records, unlawful fence placement, and fictitious legal threats. The flyers were devastating, truthful, and thoroughly well documented. We delivered them to every house in the area, even those owned by Debbie's most outspoken supporters, late one evening. The answer was instantaneous and theatrical. Debbie found one of the flyers on her own doorway, so I videotaped her the following morning. Her face moved through a range of emotions: confusion, recognition, indignation, and lastly a sort of frantic wrath indicating she knew her game was off. Right on her front lawn, she tore up the flyer. She couldn't, however, break apart the duplicates that each other house had received. Every other house in the neighborhood the truth was out, and no amount of red blazers or false authority was going to fit back in the box. Observing Debbie rush back into her house, I understood that her next action would not only thwart her plans, but also cause her to consume every one of her own false documents, symbolically. Our most thorough exposure yet was the video April and I posted that evening. We had gathered all the data: the falsified records, Debbie's work background, the unlawful fence construction, and neighbor testimonial evidence of intimidation by her strategies. Within hours it had been posted across neighborhood social media groups and local community forums under the description: the HOA president's fraud exposed, fake documents, illegal fences, and financial misbehavior. This left no space for interpretation. We were unaware, though, that our timing would coincide with Debbie's most amazing display of desperation, captured on tape. Grandpa and I were at the toll booth the next morning when we heard the sound of an engine being pushed beyond its logical bounds. Debbie's white SUV came racing around the bend, and it was obvious she wasn't intending to stop at the toll booth for a nice discussion. Her face was clear through the windscreen, red with wrath, her hands clutching the steering wheel as though she were strangling it. Grandpa gently touched the button, triggering his gate mechanism, after looking at me, then at the fast-approaching car. The next event was the kind of immaculate timing that gives one hope for cosmic justice. Grandpa's motorized gate was not only speedy, but also really functional. Debbie's SUV struck the sensor range at what had to be at least 30 miles per hour, and the gate moved precisely like a mousetrap upward. The collision that resulted was amazing, a metallic crunch that reverberated across the neighborhood, followed by steam hiss from her broken radiator. With its hood crumpled around the gate space, Debbie's SUV stopped absolutely. And for a moment, the tick-tick of cooling metal was the only sound audible. And Debbie's voice growing to levels most likely against noise regulations. Debbie sputtered, rising out of her wrecked car and swinging her arms like she was attempting to flag down aircraft. "This is destruction of property. This is assault. This is..." Her hair was messy, her red coat was wrinkled, and her carefully kept appearance of suburban power had vanished entirely. Grandpa had patiently gone over to check the gate mechanism, which had sustained absolutely no damage at all. "Ma'am," he continued in the manner he might have used to explain a basic mechanical principle to a curious child. "The gate operates on a motion sensor system. If you would approach at a reasonable speed and paid the toll like everyone else, this unfortunate incident could have been avoided entirely." I had been documenting the entire scenario. Not only the collision but also Debbie's later tantrum about community standards and preserving order that lasted over 10 minutes. This made the scene really excellent. She screamed about lawsuits and ascended on her hood for dramatic effect to point sharply at the fence and explain why it symbolized everything wrong with America. Though it was comedic gold, the video was also quite significant. It was the instant Debbie's mask slid entirely to expose the petty tyrant beneath. Debbie's amazing failure was greeted in the community with quick and strong response. Those neighbors who had been on the fence about the whole matter suddenly had a clear perspective of the person actually causing issues in their neighborhood. Completely neglecting Debbie's ongoing demands for attention, the woman who lived across from the crash site came out to offer Grandpa a cup of coffee and ask whether he was all right. Ralph arrived carrying his tow strap. Not to assist Debbie, but rather to ensure Grandpa's gate mechanism had not been harmed by the crash. As Debbie blamed everyone except her for the results of her own careless actions, even some of her former followers seemed to be changing their allegiances. By evening, Debbie's SUV catastrophe had attracted over 200,000 views, and the comment area was overflowing with personal tales of coping with irrational neighbors and petty authorities. More crucially, though, the event had energized the community in a way that none of our earlier data could have fairly captured. Though everyone understood the basic mechanics of what happened when someone tried to run through a fence at great speed, people might ignore fake documents as sophisticated legal problems. Debbie had physically fallen into the results of her own deeds, and nobody else missed any meaning from the symbolism. After the turmoil of the crash, Debbie's official complaint to the police the following day was nearly anticlimactic. She said Grandpa had booby-trapped his property with a risky mechanical gadget meant to injure vehicles. By now Debbie had obviously seen the video, and the responding officer asked her to explain why she had been accelerating toward a clearly designated toll booth on private land. The officer advised her to perhaps want to call her insurance carrier instead of submitting fake police reports, when she could not offer a good response that excluded acknowledging attempted trespassing or property damage. That evening the neighborhood center had an emergency HOA gathering. Debbie requested that the association vote to petition Grandpa's toll booth to be removed. She stood at the front of the room looking like she had aged 5 years in 5 days. Half the audience was now sporting VIP member buttons Grandpa had begun distributing with the monthly passes, and the other half was silently enraged about the falsehoods they had been fed about legal power and property ownership. It was hardly close when the vote was called. With numerous members seizing the chance to challenge Debbie's leadership and demand a complete explanation of how HOA monies had been used, the move to oppose the toll booth came up short by a ratio of 3-1. Debbie's shoulders dropped in despair as I recorded her leaving the community center that evening, and I knew Grandpa's toll booth had done something amazing. It had not just revealed a dishonest HOA president or settled a property dispute. It had brought back for a whole community what it feels like to confront a bully. Grandpa included LED lights on his fence that flashed, "Welcome to Justice," in brilliant blue letters the next morning. When I questioned him about the addition, he simply responded, "Read, sometimes you have to light the way for folks who have been walking in the dark for too long." Debbie drove past in a rental car frowning at the lights, and I knew she was at last starting to realize her rule of suburban dread was over. Debbie showed me that, when it comes to creating trouble, desperate individuals are remarkably creative, just when I thought Debbie had run out of tricks. On a Thursday morning marked urgent community alert in the kind of layout most likely intended to look official and significant, the email hit every HOA member's mailbox. The topic line came out as Boone Property Development Plans Immediate Action Required. I didn't see it myself until April forwarded it to me with a note just stating, "You need to see this right now." The email was a masterwork of deception passed for community concern. Debbie's statement indicates that she had reliable knowledge from several sources indicating Grandpa intended to sell his ranch land to a commercial development company. She said the developer planned to create a little mall right in the center of their peaceful residential area, with at least 15 store spaces, a petrol station, and a fast food restaurant. She depicted rising traffic, noise, pollution, lower property values, and total ruin of the family-friendly environment that distinguished Willowbrook Heights. The email ended with a strong appeal to neighbors to unite against this threat to our community and back quick action to guard our area from commercial development. For those who didn't know Grandpa directly, the rumor's belifulness made it especially pernicious. After all, he was a new resident who would surely explain his strong opposition to community authority by having been selling to developers and generating conflict with the HOA. I began receiving calls from neighbors curious about if the reports were accurate within hours of the email's distribution. A few seemed almost relieved to have a straightforward answer for all the previous turmoil. Others were outraged, others apprehensive. The terrible and amazing speed with which the tale traveled across the community. Debbie, however, wasn't happy to let the story circulate just via the media. She had recruited Marcus Thompson, a man looking official enough in his low-cost suit and checklist to go door-to-door verifying the development plans with neighbors. Marcus carried fictitious paperwork in a sales script. Targeting homes during the day when working people were not home, he took great care to concentrate on retirees and stay-at-home parents who would be more sensitive to his performance. Marcus had visited more than half the area by the time I learned about his door-to-door campaign. Grandpa suffered instant and terrible effects. Those neighbors who had been at least indifferent or sympathetic started shunning him. Once amicable people started crossing the street upon seeing him approaching. During what should have been a normal talk about fence repairs, someone labeled him a money-grubbing developer and slapped a message on his vehicle windshield bearing, "So US" in block letters. One afternoon I found him seated by his fence, his hand resting on the wooden rail, peering out at the vacant horse stable with an expression I had never seen before. Grandpa looked actually dejected for the first time since this entire war started. He watched the empty, still waiting horse stalls. "You know," he continued softly at last, "your grandma and I used to talk about a place like this every winter when the world felt too loud. She passed before we got it. I bought it anyway for both of us." That realization seemed to me like a blow to the chest. This covered more than just property rights or HOA conflicts. This was about commitments honored to someone else not present to see them realized and dreams postponed. Grandpa turned back to face the fence and grinned his sad, knowing smile. "You know what the worst part about lies is? It's not that people believe them. It's that they want to believe them. Makes everything simpler if I'm just some greedy old man trying to make a quick buck rather than a neighbor trying to protect his property rights," Reed said quietly, not looking at me. He held up a hand to stop me as I started to argue, telling him the neighbors would find the truth finally. "Oh, I'm not giving up," he responded. And all at once he saw that familiar spark once more. "But Debbie's taught me something important about this game we're playing. She's digging her own grave, and the harder it's going to be for her to climb back out." Marcus made the breakthrough when he visited the ranch itself, perhaps in order to provide some legitimacy to his performance by asserting he had personally surveyed the location. I was there with a camera when he arrived in a rental car sporting his inexpensive suit and holding his official-seeming checklist. Starting with his introduction as a Pinnacle Development Solutions salesperson, he asked Grandpa about his commercial development project timeframe. Marcus was unaware that Grandpa had spent 40 years working with actual developers and contractors. His queries were clearly rehearsed and could as well have included Debbie's signature on them. Grandpa asked Marcus for his contractor's license, details on corporate liability insurance, and copies of the environmental impact studies needed for any kind of commercial development of that scope. Grandpa performed really brilliantly. Grandpa advised Marcus to perhaps ask his supervisor to have his facts straight before presenting himself as a qualified company representative when he cannot produce any of those records. Including the instant Marcus realized he had been caught and tried to backpedal his way out of the situation by pretending there had been some sort of confusion about his reason for visiting. The entire encounter was caught on video. Grandpa chose to launch another onslaught that evening. He set up an open gathering on the ranch, inviting every neighbor to view his genuine property designs. The turnout was just outstanding. Many of the more than 60 attendees had been swayed by Debbie's misinformation campaign. Grandpa showed them the horse barns he was building, discussed his ideas for a little riding program for neighborhood children, and showed them the architectural blueprints for a little house restoration that would better fit his retirement needs. Most crucially, he handed them the contracts and permits proving he intended no sales to developers or anybody else. Debbie's unethical methods had failed shockingly when I posted the video of Grandpa's open meeting and April's exposure of the paid rumor campaign. Her toll booth evolved from being only a gate. It had come to represent everything that was wonderful about neighbors supporting one another, as well as everything wrong with HOA overreach. April's concept was the live stream, but Grandpa suggested the timing. It was time to bring the fight right to the people who had been observing this drama play out from the sidelines after weeks of false documentation, hired actors, and whisper campaigns. We positioned the camera at the toll booth during busiest neighborhood traffic, when people were returning from school and employment. We also took care to highlight the stream on every local social media group and community forum we came across. The title was straightforward and clear. HOA President Exposed Live Confrontation at Boone Ranch. We had over 300 watchers within minutes of starting, and the count continued rising. Grandpa stood by his gate sporting his finest plaid shirt and a confident expression that suggested he was ready for whatever was ahead. He squarely pointed for the camera and the expanding internet audience toward Debbie's fence. For months, Debbie Holbrook has been using fake documents, manufactured letters, and paid actors to try to steal my property and threaten my neighbors. This fence does not belong here, and neither does the power grab it represents. Today, we will show you precisely the extent of this corruption. He showed out the stack of false documentation Debbie had gathered over her campaign, and one by one, he tore each document apart, while demonstrating why it was bogus, unlawful, or both. There was enough proof to overwhelm me. By now April had assembled a thorough file covering Debbie's dismissal from her job, the falsified government records, Marcus Thompson's invoice, and quotes from neighbors who had been harassed or intimidated. On camera, we showed every piece of evidence illustrating how it matched the more general pattern of abuse and manipulation. Comments from viewers sharing their own HOA horror tales and expressing wonder at the degree of detail in our research exploded in the livestream conversation. We had over 1,500 views before the 30-minute point, and the narrative was spreading on social media sites faster than we could have followed. The conversation was raging. "Where's Debbie now?" One customer said. Still another. "Bet she's hiding behind that fence of lies." Keeping the audience interested, I was reading the remarks aloud when movement caught my eye. A rental car. Not just any rental automobile, but one driven with the kind of careless rush signaled by its driver, had totally lost touch on reality. And the automobile screamed into frame as though called by the internet gods themselves. Debbie came up in her rental automobile, still trying to pass for the queen of a country gone extinct. She stormed over to the toll booth, with a fresh stack of papers. She waved like they were some sort of magic wand. The SUV was evidently still in the shop getting her gate damage fixed. "This is harassment," she yelled loudly enough for the live stream microphone to precisely capture every word. The live broadcast conversation burst with laughter, emojis, and remarks on her awful timing. "I have new documentation that proves this entire operation is illegal, and I'm here to serve notice that legal action will be taken immediately." Grandpa simply grinned though, and requested her to show him these fresh records. Debbie created even more blatantly false papers than her past efforts. One of the documents was really printed on the reverse of what looked to be a grocery shop receipt. The letterhead was incorrect, the legal language was full of mistakes. Grandpa put each paper up to the camera so viewers could see the poor quality of the forgeries. Then he painstakingly explained exactly why each document was fake. "Debbie," he added at last, "these aren't just fake. Did you really think you could intimidate me with papers you printed at home 20 minutes ago? Anyone with basic reading skills is insulted by these." Debbie's realization that she was live-streamed to an audience of more than 2,000 people, many of whom were remarking in real time about her appearance, her strategies, and her clear desperation set off the clash. Claiming privacy rights on what was obviously Grandpa's private property, she sought to demand that we cease filming, and then threatened to contact the police for harassment. Grandpa reminded out that she was the one who had gone there uninvited to make disturbance on his territory, and she turned to her typical defense of community norms and property values. The issue was that weeks of data had completely refutes her community standards argument, and her own behavior was being aired live to an audience that could clearly see precisely what kind of person she actually was. Arriving during the height of the conflict, Ralph had a folder containing official county records proving the fence was on Grandpa's land, and the HOA had never possessed the disputed area. The timing was flawless. Ralph's entrance on the live stream, accompanied with legal documentation of property title, was like seeing the last piece of a jigsaw fit. The conversation burst with remarks praising the proof, and even Debbie seemed to understand that her posture had become totally unworkable. She insisted the county records were somehow incorrect or out of date, but Ralph had provided copies of surveys going back to the initial subdivision, and they all told the same tale. As neighbors began arriving in person, attracted by the drama and the expanding online audience, the live stream peaked. April showed everyone who wished to view the documentation for themselves printed copies of Marcus Thompson's invoice and Debbie's employment termination letter. As Debbie's meltdown played out in real time, several VIP pass holders arrived to offer their support for Grandpa. Even some of the non-VIP neighbors looked to be changing their minds. The difference was clear-cut. While Debbie grew more hysterical and incoherent as her lies were revealed one by one, Grandpa stayed cool and accurate during the confrontation. Over 10,000 views and hundreds more shares had gathered by the time the incident concluded with Debbie withdrawing to her rental car under calls for her resignation as HOA president. There was enough proof to overwhelm me. The community backing was unambiguous, and Debbie's reputation had been utterly ruined. Grandpa opened his gate as I concluded the show to declare that VIP members will have free admission for the rest of the week in honor of what he termed Transparency Day. The neighborhood burst in applause, and I knew we had just seen something amazing: the ability of truth, technology, and community action together to fight corruption and rebuild justice. Debbie's terror reign had ended. Grandpa's gate, however, had one last surprise for her. Some just saw it as a toll booth. It was the last gate before dictatorship for the rest of us. 3 days following the live stream, official networks reported Debbie's resignation as HOA president. But everyone in the community had seen it coming from the minute she had left the scene in her rental car. The concise and professional letter cited personal reasons and a wish to pursue other prospects. April's contacts at the county planning office, however, verified Debbie was also under investigation for the falsified government paperwork. At last, the lady who had spent months frightening neighbors with false authority and false documentation was facing actual legal repercussions for her activities. The area changed right away and dramatically. People began interacting like normal human beings instead of suspicious enemies, without Debbie's continual meddling, and created catastrophe. A group Ralph arranged with other neighbors agreeing to help repair the natural walkway, linking the community for decades surreptitiously, demolished the barriers sparking this entire dispute. Children started playing in places Debbie designated off-limits, and front yards started showing the kind of personality and inventiveness Debbie's tight regulations had discouraged years of community standards enforcement had denied. Grandpa still had to finish, though. The man who had turned a property conflict into a masterclass in innovative problem-solving had one more surprise in store, bigger than anyone could have predicted. Grandpa commissioned a permanent installation honoring the triumph and acting as a reminder of what communities could achieve when they banded together against injustice, working with a local artist and financing from neighbors inspired by his opposition to HOA tyranny. Over 200 people attended the gorgeous Saturday morning unveiling event at what had formerly been Debbie's illegal fence location. neighbors from Willowbrook Heights, local reporters covering the story, and even several city council members drawn in by the grassroots organizing effort comprised the audience. Ralph had brought his rebuilt Mustang. April had invited her fellow journalists, and local children were running about wearing VIP member pins. Grandpa had transformed into collector's items. Grandpa drew aside the canvas covering, and the audience burst in cheers and ovation. Designed with hand-carved elements reflecting the history and beliefs of the neighborhood, the installation was a lovely wooden gateway painted in vibrant hues. The name etched on the arch over the entry, Walt's Gate, Run Under Freedom, surprised me most though. Professionally crafted, totally permanent, the sign was big enough to be seen from the street. Debbie would have to pass a memorial to her own loss every morning when she left her house and every evening when she returned. The name chosen was exactly pointed and perfect. Walt mentioned Walter Whitman, the American poet who had written on democracy, personal freedom, and the need of challenging power when it overreached itself. Still, the name also worked at a more basic level. It sounded like the kind of pleasant, welcoming venue where neighbors really cared about one another, rather than only property values and rule application. Grandpa's subtle but clear lesson on the distinction between leadership and control underlined in the subtitle, Managed by Freedom. Several neighbors who had been motivated by Grandpa's example to question other cases of HOA overreach in the community spoke at the ceremony. One pair discussed battling too tight landscaping rules. Another family spoke of their successful appeal of policies enforcing discrimination. And April said she was working on a book on HOA reform with Grandpa's tale as the major case study. It was amazing to see how a neighborhood split under manipulation and fear became a community bound by common principles. Perhaps the most poignant moment, though, occurred when the neighborhood kids gave Grandpa a handcrafted sign for his toll booth bearing, Honorary Mayor of Walt's Gate. Drawings of horses, gates, and what looked to be Debbie's SUV running into several challenges covered the placard. Grandpa embraced the accolade with the kind of sincere feeling that reminded everyone of the reason they had originally backed him. This wasn't about settling a property conflict. It was about maintaining the kind of community where neighbors looked out for one another rather than searching for means of division. I was standing with Grandpa by his well-known toll booth, which had evolved into a sort of local icon, as the ceremony came to an end and people started to leave. Many had advised him to run in the next election for HOA president. And from his smile at the invitation, I sensed he was giving it careful thought. You know, Reed, he continued, observing children play about Walt's Gate while their parents chatted like regular people. I think Debbie might have done us all a favor. Sometimes a true catastrophe is necessary to remind people of what community really entails. A U-Haul rolled Willowbrook Heights 3 days later, at precisely 7:12 a.m. Debbie loaded the last box silently with sunglasses. Nobody waved goodbye. The toll gate clicking open and closed like punctuation is the only sound. Though the story's epilogue is still to be written, the crucial triumph has already been claimed. Transparency, community organization, and the basic idea that property rights count have completely negated Debbie's attempts to control and threaten her neighbors by false authority and contrived crises. Those who yell the most have no power. It belongs to those who remain when others flee. More as a neighborhood joke than a major charge system, the toll booth still runs on a sporadic basis. And the VIP passes have evolved into collectors' objects individuals frame and show as markers of their involvement in something greater than themselves. You know exactly what this narrative reflects if you have ever dealt with HOA overreach, small-town tyrants, or politicians who believe their authority goes beyond what the law really permits. It's about the distinctions between community standards and personal freedom, between neighbors who care about one another and bureaucrats who care just about power, between leadership and control. Comment below whether Grandpa ought to run for HOA president. With all we have gone through, I have a feeling his campaign slogan would be something like, "Make neighborhoods neighborly again." And really, this community deserves exactly the kind of leadership this person offers. With HOA Journal, you have just gone through yet another insane episode. Subscribe now to enter even more turmoil, hilarity, and jaw-dropping stories.